Today is Sunday, June 22nd, 2026, and today is National Onion Ring Day, which means it's the perfect time to talk about environmental disasters, mobile phones, and Harry Potter. A sentence I did not expect to write today. But after digging through today's stories, I noticed that they all shared something in common. Nobody expected them to become as important as they did. A river fire that helped spark environmental reform. A technology that changed how humans communicate. And a book that grew into one of the biggest publishing phenomena in history. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and your guide through the tiny historical details that somehow make humanity look even stranger. On June 22, 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, caught fire. Now, that sentence sounds like it should be impossible. Rivers aren't supposed to burn. That's one of the defining features of rivers. Yet, this one did. The reason was pollution. Decades of industrial waste had left parts of the river coated with oil, chemicals, and debris. When sparks from a passing train ignited the surface, flames erupted. To be fair, this wasn't even the first time the river had caught fire. Not even close. The Cuyahoga had burned multiple times before. But this particular fire arrived at the right moment. Or perhaps the wrong moment. Americans were becoming increasingly concerned about environmental issues. Photographs and reports of polluted waterways were receiving greater attention. Public attitudes were shifting. And while the 1969 fire itself was relatively small, it became a powerful symbol. Suddenly, people across the country were asking a very reasonable question. How polluted does a river have to be before it catches fire? The event helped fuel momentum for environmental reform. In the years that followed, legislation strengthened, environmental protections expanded, and public awareness increased. One thing I find remarkable is that the Cuyahoga River today is dramatically healthier than it was in 1969. Wildlife returned, water quality improved, and the river became an example of environmental recovery, which means this story is unusual. It's a story where things actually got better. And speaking of things that transformed everyday life, June 22nd also marks a moment when communication took a giant leap forward. On June 22, 1983, the first regularly scheduled cell phone service began in the United States. At the time, cell phones were not the sleek devices we carry today. They were expensive, bulky, and often looked like something borrowed from a science fiction movie. In some cases, they were literally installed in cars because carrying them around wasn't especially practical. Yet, even in those early days, people could see the potential. For most of human history, communication had a location attached to it. If someone wanted to call you, they called your house, or your office, or wherever the phone happened to be. Cellular technology changed that. The phone could travel with the person. That sounds obvious now. At the time, it felt revolutionary. And one thing I enjoy about early cell phone advertisements is how futuristic they seem. People imagine business executives making important calls from anywhere. They imagine greater freedom, greater flexibility, greater convenience. What they generally did not predict was millions of people carrying tiny supercomputers capable of taking photographs, streaming movies, navigating cities, ordering food, and arguing with strangers online. History often works like that. We accurately predict the first step and completely miss the next 10. And then there are things that arrive so quietly that almost nobody notices them. At first. On June 22, 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published in the United Kingdom. And if you've somehow avoided hearing about Harry Potter over the last few decades, first of all, congratulations on your impressive isolation from popular culture. Second, this book's success was anything but guaranteed. J.K. Rowling's manuscript had been rejected by multiple publishers. The eventual first print run was relatively small. Nobody expected a global phenomenon. Nobody expected movies, theme parks, merchandise, academic studies, fan conventions, and generations of readers growing up alongside the characters. At its core, the story was remarkably simple. A lonely boy discovers he's a wizard. Then, everything changes. Readers responded immediately. The world felt immersive. The characters felt real. And the books arrived at exactly the right cultural moment. One thing I find fascinating is that the first publication looks so modest in hindsight. A relatively small release, a children's book. No giant launch event, no worldwide media frenzy. Just a book entering the world. History loves moments like that. The moment where nobody realizes they're standing at the beginning of something enormous. And after spending today's episode around things that unexpectedly became cultural landmarks, it feels fitting to end with someone who became one without ever quite following the traditional path. Born on June 22, 1958 in Royal Oak, Michigan, Bruce Campbell became one of the most beloved cult figures in entertainment. And I'll admit something. Every once in a while, one of these birthday segments lands on someone I'm already a fan of. Today is one of those days. Campbell's career is fascinating because he never really followed the conventional Hollywood path. He became famous not by chasing blockbuster leading man roles, but by becoming incredibly memorable. His breakthrough came through The Evil Dead, a low-budget horror film made with friends, limited resources, and a surprising amount of creativity. What followed was one of the most unusual careers in entertainment. He played heroes, villains, comic relief, television characters, voice roles, and of course, Ash Williams. The chainsaw-handed, wisecracking monster fighter who somehow became one of the most recognizable cult characters in movie history. What I appreciate most about Campbell is that he always seems to understand exactly what kind of movie he's in. He's willing to lean into the absurdity, willing to laugh at himself, willing to embrace the fact that not every performance needs to be serious to be memorable. In an industry obsessed with being the biggest star in the room, Campbell built a career by being uniquely himself. And, judging by the continued enthusiasm of his fans, that turned out to be a pretty good strategy. Groovy. Looking back across today's stories, I kept noticing how difficult it is to predict what will matter. A river fire becomes a symbol of environmental change. An expensive new technology transforms daily life. A children's book becomes a worldwide phenomenon. And an actor from a low-budget horror movie becomes a cult icon. The future rarely arrives with a giant sign announcing itself. Most of the time, it starts small. And only later do we realize we were watching history happen. Anyway, that's what I ended up finding while working through June 22nd. And before I go, here's today's oddly appropriate quote. "It's kind of fun to do the impossible." Walt Disney. If you'd like to hear more of my work, narration, podcasts, or other projects, you can find it all at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and thanks for wandering through history with me for a while. I'll see you tomorrow.